And we are live. So, good day, everyone. Peace be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum. And this is a special discussion as an aftermath to my three previous discussions or debates, the one with Arun Ra, the one with Dr. Amr, and the one with Jackson Wheat and Steve McRae. And I have run into T here, who I have been conversing with multiple times before. And he told me he would like to discuss the matter with me. And here we are. So first, I'm going to introduce T, to introduce himself. And then I'm going to go into my argument about why observing animal life leads one to belief in Allah or belief in God. So T, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm T. I'm a computational biologist as my career. I'm now retired, so I don't actually do that anymore for a living. But I still have the experience that I carry with me. And I thought that your topic was especially interesting. I liked your presentation. I thought you had some good questions, and I thought that a fruitful discussion of some of the answers to those questions would lead to more enlightenment. So I wanted to have that discussion. So thank you very much for bringing me on, and I look forward to the presentation.
All right. So with no further ado, we are going now to do a little presentation here. For some reason, the system is telling me that the streaming on Facebook is interrupted for one reason or the other. So we'll be continuing on Facebook, on YouTube anyway. All right, so let me share my presentation. It's going to be a 10-12 minute one. And all right, so here we go. So my argument goes like this. God or Allah is a creator who wants to be found, and he cares. So he has created a world where someone who is looking for him can find him. This does not prevent people from exercising their skills of looking the other way. But from my perspective, the evidence for a God who created and cares and wants to be found, should be accessible to the average person, because the religion is not specifically for highly qualified scientists or engineers or doctors, but for everyone. So in this presentation, I'm going to go through observations from everyday animal life around us and see if this can take us to God. I'm an electronics and communications engineer. I did my master's in computer networks and control. I didn't do the thesis, but I did my master's in business administration, international business, and I had after my engineering and business education, 4 years of Islamic studies. I had 30 years of experience with information systems, worked for 20 years until now as CIO and CEO in different transnational companies. And I've traveled the world, and of course, I'm running the Finding Truth YouTube channel. So can we find the creator by detecting his guidance, is my question. And why is this an important question? It is because the question of finding God is a question of being religious. And religion is based on revelation. And religion is essentially guidance to human beings. So if we want to maybe verify that somebody is a messenger or a prophet or feel comfortable about it, we maybe need to feel comfortable about revelation coming from outside of this world to a creature in this world, to a human being. So can we see this as a common observation in this world, is my question. In the Quran, he says, in a conversation that was between Pharaoh and Moses, Pharaoh asks Moses, "Who is your Lord?" And Moses replies, قال ربنا الذي أعطى كل شيء خلقه ثم هدى, which means he said, our Lord is the one who has given everything its creation and then guided. So in this verse, God is putting it to us that he's not only guiding human beings through religion, but he's also guiding everything that he has created. Obviously, the guidance to physical, inanimate things is through the laws of physics, but through living things, to animals, we can find much more. In my discipline of engineering, one thing I learned about engineering is that you learn engineering. You learn how to use human and material and economic resources to serve human beings, and this is a science and an art. And engineering starts from setting purpose to things. You have a purpose for something, you think of the functionality that will fulfill the purpose, you design it, you pick materials for it, you make a delivery process, but then you also make a guidance system for it, a manual of instructions. The engineer would give this manual with the product to who is going to use the product. If the product is autonomous, we would typically program this into the product. But if we want to make this product, shipped out of the box, then maybe after it is shipped to you and you open the box, it downloads its instruction manual. If it's an autonomous car, for example, it will download the recent map. It will download the recent traffic law. And this is very interesting because this process from purpose to disposal is something that we can also see in life around us. And I am here going to focus on the matter of guidance. Can we see guidance to the things that we call animals around us? And then if we find this guidance, if we find something that is knowledge level that has to be learned, then we are obliged to ask the question, where is this knowledge coming from? I will give one example here. I have given it before, but I'm going to go into depth in it because maybe some have not appreciated this example. It's about beavers, and a beaver is this rodent. And while it is such a little animal, it builds those structures which are called beaver dams. It builds very ingenious housing. We build dams as human beings. It is an engineering marvel, and it requires plenty of knowledge. Let's appreciate that more. This is a satellite image for the result of a beaver dam, which is at a huge geographical scale. So this creature, counter to what we are used to in nature, where creatures just adapt to its nature by, getting extinct if they do not. This creature terraforms its environment. It's slow on land, so a bear or a tiger or whatever predator can eat it easily. It cannot run fast, but it's very fast in water. So what it does is that it goes to rivers, it builds the dam, it floods the whole area, and now it's in its favorite ecosystem. Even the woods are now covered with water, so it can reach to the trees that it actually can pull down, and it eats the bark and it eats the pulp. And this is an animal that knows about terraforming its environment. And the dam, this is an example for the dam, where behind the dam you will find all this water. In front of the dam, the water level will be low, and the raised water level is its preferred environment. It will not just randomly find the logs. It will actually, like you see here down there, it will cut down the trees, cut down its branches, and as you see down right, it will take the logs, it will use boulders, and then logs, and then even at the rims from the side of the water, it uses mud to seal it off. So this is a creature that understands state-of-the-art civil engineering. And it has a bill of material, and it uses the material of its environment to fulfill a design. Not only this, but after it has created this pond, it will create to itself a housing. It's called beaver lodge. And so if some bear jumps after it or there is danger, it has this lodge. It has tunnels only accessible from underwater. Inside the lodge, there is above the surface of the water, there is a place where there is air, and up in the ceiling, there is ventilation. It is exactly like, so this guy, the strategist, is exactly like a castle with a water ditch around it. And now it's protected from predators. And when winter is here, it has the right amount of air, the humidity, and you would see out of its chimney the warm air of its breath coming out. Not only this, but as you see in this drawing, just beside its lodge, it will grab pieces of wood that it likes to eat. It will punch them into the mud in the pond. And when it's winter and there is a layer of snow, or the surface of the pond will freeze, it will have this food accessible from the tunnel, so it can get out of the tunnel, bring in some food, bring it into the kids, and they would eat. And this is called even the beaver refrigerator, because it keeps the food fresh and it can feed on it all over winter. Actually, it even builds a transportation system into the woods, where if it wants to go back to the woods, it will go into like waterways, tunnels that it's built, so that's always running in water, so nobody can catch it. And now the question is, this is not only with beavers, we see it with so many things, so many creatures. This is knowledge that can only be learned in school. This is knowledge that does not exist anywhere we know. If you hatch a bird or bring a beaver into captivity and then throw it into the wild and take its parents from it, it will just behave like a beaver. Where is it getting this information from? In information theory, if there is information received, there is information transmitted. This is not only happening to beavers, it's happening almost to every animal. Bees, birds, sparrows that build these nests. I made many examples. Salmon fish, migrating creatures. There is this wealth of information that is always transmitted to every living thing. Where is this information coming from? And it is not rational or logical that we find a signal at the receiver and think that this signal is coming from nowhere. If it's a signal, if it's intelligible, then there is a receiver. Because if there is no transmitter, all what you will get is noise. And the closing here, if the important aspect about religion is revelation, and revelation refers to a mind, a divine supreme mind, that is transmitting knowledge and transmitting guidance and information. And we find that this guidance and information is ubiquitous across creatures. We know those creatures are innocent. They are just following the rules. Then, number one, we need to fairly conclude that there is an overarching mind, supreme mind, who not only exists, but cares. And number two, since he said in this book, I am making it, and we check and we know that there is no other explanation, this is not a God of the gaps argument. And number three, when we find that he selects specific people among us to whom he sends his revelation and he calls religion, and he says, I'm giving you this because you have free will. You have the opportunity to accept it or reject it. He doesn't force it onto us by downloading it into our minds. I think it is rational that we accept that this is transmission from our Creator and seriously consider its contents. Thank you, T, and I hope I've made my point clear, and I will be glad to hear what you have to say about it, and then we can have our back and forth.
Well, yeah, thank you very much for taking the time to do that excellent presentation. I really enjoyed the slides. I thought that the questions were interesting and worth discussing. I made some pretty copious notes during the taking of it, and I thought that I would just start by having sort of a response to the entire thing, and then we can dive into an open discussion of what all has been said. Does that sound good?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so the first thing that I want to acknowledge is my understanding of what it is you said is first and foremost, there is a creator, wants to be found, cares, is revelatory, can be detected by detecting guidance, is outside of this world, And then you went on to, so that was sort of the defining of what it is that we're talking about. And then you went on to make the first claim, which was about the Quran. And what I saw was a just so story. That is to say that the story is definitely a story and one that matches the data, but it has no predictive powers and can't be tested as true. You then went on to say that these things had a purpose and design, such as a blueprint or external manufacturing process. That's what you were talking about, was that blueprint or external manufacturing process as what basically civil engineering, like when you build a car, you talked about the building of a car. That's the process by which you set up a external manufacturing process, is you give your idea to somebody else and say, here, now go build this. That this requires a knowledge level, that knowledge level means that it had to be learned. And then you asked, where is that knowledge coming from? You pointed at terraformers, which have instinctual behavior, and they are strategists, which is part of their instinctual behavior. And then you asked, who gives the map? And I think that's a poor assumption given the evidence. I would say, how does the map come into being is a better question, rather than adding the loaded question of whom. Because whom presumes that it's being given, rather than the map forms, maybe through somebody giving it, maybe through a different process. And we can talk more about that process in open discussion. You said the information, I think you said the information does not exist, which I believe is incorrect. It exists as a function of the expression of their genes. The reason that beavers know how to build dams is because they have that instinctual behavior as part of their genetic heritage. Where is that knowledge coming from? It's coming from the evolutionary process, as best we can tell, given all the facts available to us. The fact that it's ubiquitous across creatures is true. That would be expected if common ancestry were also true. That's actually a prediction of common ancestry and the evolutionary process. You then went on to say that we can conclude that there is a overarching mind, that it exists and it cares, and that we are selected by it. I would challenge that assumption. I would say that that's not necessarily what we actually observe. We don't observe a mind or something that's overarching at that level. We do observe something that is overarching at a more fundamental level, and that's energy, chemistry, those types of things. And to say that we are selected, the fact of the matter is that we're the only ones that we are aware of that are capable of having produced such knowledge. Such a description of those things occurring, a description of the evolutionary process, a description of the fact that beavers do these things at all. We are the only species that we actually do know of that has that capability to make such a description possible, to actually go ahead and write a book about it, to make a dissertation, to make a presentation, to have that discussion about what is actually happening. Humans produced the knowledge of them doing that, and then evolution produced the genetics that caused them to do that. And that's my argument.
Okay, so let me take this and go backwards. So you say humans produce the knowledge that they use to do similar things.
Which is to say, you produced the description of beavers and the dams that they built, right? We are the only ones who are capable of doing that. We are the only ones who are capable of making a blueprint and handing it to somebody else and saying, here, now go build this, in much the same way that we are the only ones who are capable of making PowerPoint presentations. That's what I'm saying about that, right?
Yeah, I like that. So you're describing the process of accumulating and conveying knowledge. that we see in human beings. So you acknowledge the fact that knowledge can be acquired and it can also be transferred. So if you, for example, have studied computational biology and you have your achievements on that, and you know about biology and you have read it, and you know about animals and DNA, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a baby, okay? You get married and you have a baby. If we separate that baby from you, will he know computational biology by default?
No, because computational biology is not something that's built into our genetic behaviors.
Great.
Unlike the beaver who builds the dam and knows how to build the dam, because that is something that's built into their genetic expression.
So let's take that step by step before we reach the beaver. So we deconstruct this gradually. So let's say we are a civil engineer and you have learned building dams and you have participated in building the Hoover Dam. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Will your child know about designs for dams, the materials that are needed for them, how to bring them, how to sort them, etc., etc.?
No, because those are on blueprints, not part of our genetics.
Great. So let's go now to the example of the beaver. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Which doesn't have necessarily the capability of building a blueprint and transmitting that to someone else. They instead have a very different capability, the instinctual behavior of how to build a dam.
Now let's look into that. So how to build a dam, as I have shown in my presentation, involves this animal that understands that it needs boulders, it understands it needs logs of a certain shape, it doesn't, and it's specific arrangement.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually, if I have expanded, but I wanted to finish this in 10 minutes, it actually would go and it will find the proper place to build the dam. It will not just go to any random place. It will find the proper place.
Yep. Because it has a selection process.
Yeah,
right?
It has a selection process. It knows it needs a place where the water level will be different, and it has the capability to bridge two sides of the river, etc. It will not go in the middle of nowhere and start putting logs and hope that it will create something.
Yeah, which isn't to say that all beavers are perfect. I've seen beaver dams collapse before, right? Because it happens, right?
Actually, I have seen this nice movie from one of those documentaries, and the poor beaver has built his dam, and then sort of avalanche happens. Yeah. And hard luck, Mr. Beaver. He has to do it again. But
yes,
they are
absolutely.
They're also very persistent. And in another movie, he would go and he would find a deserted place, and you see him looking at it and assessing if he would renovate it, and then he would take the decision. So it's really very interesting. But the question is here: so you see this creature, the animal.
Mm-hmm.
It knows the building materials, the bill of materials. It knows the design. It does this crazy thing about its lodge. It understands ventilation. It understands tunnels. It understands below and above the surface of the water. And it understands that this lodge, and you get a new beaver, it didn't learn from anybody, and it will just go and do it. Now, the question is, you see, it might be, well, if we call it instinct, that will not really solve anything, because instinct is just a tag.
I think it does, because what we're talking about is the beaver is following a set of inbuilt reactions to a specific set of stimuli. That's what we're talking about, right? When we get this stimuli, it triggers this response. And to say that it knows the design, I think is a bit of a stretch. I'm not sure that's really the case. Much like you don't know the design of a car necessarily when you go to, just build one part of it, right? You only need to know that the behavior that is required to produce that one part. And then when you see that part is built, you need to have the behavior that builds the next part, and then the next part, and then the next part, until the end result is the dam, right? And that is to say, when the beaver sees this, the right shape of the river, it triggers its inbuilt genetic expression of going and finding logs. And once it's found some appropriately sized logs, that triggers the genetically inbuilt expression of going and dragging those logs back to the place where it found before, right? So it's more like following an instruction booklet than it is having an overarching idea of the design of what we're trying to build.
So here we go. Let's now look into the science. As a person who is a computational biologist and you do models, etc., do you have as part of your models that the DNA codes for anything like how to build dams or how to build bottles?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you can identify a place in the genome of the beaver that tells that this is the building materials of the dam, and this is how it should look like, and this is how to select its position.
You wouldn't expect to find it in the genetic material itself. You would expect to find it in the expression of the traits from the genetic sequences, which is different, right? This is the difference of genotype versus phenotype.
But phenotypes are body shapes. I don't think that
they're more than that. They're more than that. Okay, so phenotype is any expression of the genotype in terms of physicality.
So
right?
What is your scientific proof that the expression of the blueprint of a dam, including its building materials, steps of the construction, finding the proper location, even maintaining it, actually, if the dam has a defect, it will go and it will maintain it, and it will maintain it in the proper way. How other than speculating, what is your proof? And other than it happening, because this is the observation that we are trying to explain. So if you just say it's from the genes, it's speculation, unless you can prove it.
Because we have evidence of these types of traits recombining to form new traits.
Right.
Like in mice, which build burrows, and when you breed different types of mice together, they end up with a hybrid type of burrow. Like in turtles, which have hybrid types of shells, like beavers, which breed and have hybrid types of dams. All of these are evidence that there is something that is happening during the recombination of the genes that results in the expression of these behaviors.
I will not count the shells altogether because this is a physical part of the turtle body. So
what I'm saying is it's all one and the same, though, right? It's all physical expressions of the genetic sequences.
So here you go. You have a mouse or a bee or an ant or whatever kind of animal that builds its place of living. And the question is not whether this bee or this beaver or this whatever will have a slightly different shape of its lodge if it's mated with another kind of beaver. The question is, type 1 of beaver and type 2 of beaver both know how to build a beaver lodge from where? Not whether the hybrid will change its idea according to its new body shape, because obviously I would immediately tell you that the same information conveyance and knowledge conveyance process that has told parent 1 and parent 2 will tell offspring 1. This explains nothing. So let me give you this example to explain. If, for example, you know how to read maps, or somebody else, because the example is not very nice. So if somebody knows how to read maps, and this person marries another lady who knows how to read maps, and they get a child that they teach how to read maps, but he turns up blind. And now being blind will stop him from reading maps, but maybe now they will teach him how to read maps that are encoded in Braille language or Braille language. So you get a beaver. It knows how to build housing. Another beaver knows how to build housing. They're a little bit different from each other, and there is an offspring. And this offspring, due to mating, has a different body shape. So he gets the proper information that because you are bigger or smaller, maybe your tunnel should be bigger or smaller. It doesn't explain, however, where did beaver 1 or 2 get the information. And it even shows that guidance is for everyone.
Okay.
Every single creature gets its guidance. So the question is, what is the origin of the guidance? Not whether the guidance will change. If the pigeon is blind, it will use magnetic field. If the pigeon is has a problem with its head, it will use smell or will use the sun as a compass. The question is, how does it know that there is something like a map? How does it know that it migrates? How does the beaver understand that a pond will create its preferred environment? How does it understand that? How does it understand refrigeration? How does it understand transportation? All of this is at least is very mysterious, and at least should grab your and my attention, and at least we should find a solution that is not speculative. And if it's speculative, we need to test it to the extent of knowing the origin of the information, not knowing the correlation of the change.
Okay, so working backwards from what you said, yes, I agree. We should test the origin, right? The idea that that this is unknowable or unknown is simply false. It's very much a simpler process to understand. The point that I was making was we are making a prediction with regards to specific behaviors being encoded in the genetic sequences. If specific sequences are encoded in the genetic sequences, then recombining those sequences should produce hybrid sequences, or hybrid traits, rather. Right, which is to say that there should be a recombination process with the sequence, which in turn results in a recombination process of the traits. And that's exactly what we see. When these two things breed, they recombine their genetic sequences, which forms hybrid traits of those sequences. Okay, so the example is hybrid tunnels, hybrid things like that. Okay, so we're making a prediction regarding if something is true, if the information is encoded in the genetics, then this prediction would also be true. And alternatively, if that was not the method by which this information was being passed on, that would not happen, right? There would be no change in the tunnels. There would be no change in the shells. There would be no change in the dam configurations, right? So it's a falsifiable prediction, because then we can go and test it. Well, when these two things mate, do they produce hybrid traits? Yes, they do. They produce hybrid traits, right? So that is evidence towards the hypothesis that these traits come from the genetic sequences, and then working backwards from there, that also explains how they got those traits. Okay, so that happened through a long series of trait acquisition, where one trait was built on top of another, and it started with something very basic as being able to crawl under a leaf, right? And then that crawling under a leaf built into going and finding a leaf, and then that finding a leaf was genetically selected for from an evolutionary perspective because it provided shelter from the rain, versus those who stood in the rain and died. Okay, and then that led to burrows, and then that led to dam making, right? There's a long process of acquisition there, where one feature built upon the changes of the previous generation. And so that selection process of dams are better than burrows, and burrows are better than leaves, and leaves are better than just a leaf, and just a leaf is better than nothing at all. Well, that explains how that trait acquisition process went from an evolutionary perspective. So if that is true, then we would see in the fossil record a long series of transitionary forms as they got fossilized, each of them possessing those capabilities in ascending order with regards to when they were placed down in the fossil record. It would start with just things that were able to crawl under a leaf, and then we would see things that were able to go and find a leaf and crawl underneath it, or put multiple leaves together, right? And then if it were true, then we would see the start of burrowers and people and things with claws and stuff like that, and then we would see more advanced burrows like dams, right? And that is in fact exactly what we see. So once again, this is evidence that fits the hypothesis. It makes the hypothesis more likely than the null hypothesis, where the null hypothesis is that they are not passed down through genetic traits, because evidently they are, right? And that's the thing, is all we're trying to do is we're trying to make that hypothesis more likely than the null hypothesis, right? Which is to say it's not. Now, we can propose a separate hypothesis, which is that these traits are handed down from a process outside of the universe. But I'm not sure how you're going to test that.
Okay, so let me respond to that. I can give you 4 or 5 refutations to that. The most advanced animal, I'm using the word animal here biologically. So the most advanced creature, living being on the face of this planet in terms of intellect is the human being. The one that acquires knowledge and passes knowledge forward in a structured way and innovates is the human being.
Yes.
There is no evidence whatsoever that the genetics of the human being carry any of the knowledge that a human being would acquire during his life, and you have agreed to that. So this is number one.
Yeah, I've definitely agreed to that. So that's a non-issue. We would expect that if there was a distinction between genetic instinct and acquired knowledge, and there is. Right?
Yeah. So I'm just let me continue all my 5 points. I'll go into them one by one. So this is the first thing. So there is knowledge that we know can only be acquired through learning and through accumulation of knowledge, and we have a new offspring. It would either acquire the knowledge through learning or it will not acquire the knowledge through learning, in which case it will fail to produce this knowledge in a way that is similar to its parents who have had idea about the knowledge. Okay?
Well, no, but that's not the thing. It would acquire the knowledge through genetic methods. For instance, babies know how to suckle. They know how to breathe. They know how to do all these behaviors which are instinctual.
No, I'm talking now about knowledge that is learned, and I have actually in my previous presentation used the suckling as one of these kinds of knowledge that is given to the human being. And I have actually referred to scripture, a scriptural interpretation that this knowledge is given to the human being in specific, because as a baby, since you cannot learn it, God gives it to you. So let's look at what we know is something that actually it's given to every mammal offspring. What we know as compared to animals, like building nests, burrows, dams, whatever, is something that is learned and is not transmitted through genetics. There is no proof whatsoever that if you even teach a dog how to make a trick, that its offspring will know the trick. You will have to train the offspring from scratch.
Okay, but that's still acquired knowledge. You're still
Absolutely.
You're still confused. Okay, so
I'm talking about acquired knowledge. So let's go to step 3.
Let's talk about genetic knowledge, genetic instinct, though, right? Because that's the interesting part here.
So now let's go about what is genetic.
Well, like you said, suckling behavior is behavior that has been inherited by every mammal. And I think you said something interesting there, right? Because mammals all do share a common ancestor by definition. That's what it means to be a mammal, right? So
actually, the argument about evolution is not important to me here. So if we agree that common ancestry or not common ancestry is not the issue. The issue is, I'm not arguing with or against evolution in this presentation, because whether creatures have been created directly, created through evolution, created from dust, doesn't make a difference. We know that what is in genetic material translates into proteins, enzymes, regulatory networks, etc., builds cells, builds tissues, specializes, and creates a shape, a body shape. It also creates some reactive responses. You are hungry, you want to eat, you feel hot, you make a reflex.
Your heart,
you make a reflex.
Beats, your lungs breathe.
We know that these things are regulated through hormones. Those are material processes.
You
that
swallow. You choke. Right.
So those are material processes that we know are regulated through chemical reactions and thermal reactions, etc. We can trace those.
What we're expressly saying, though, is that they are expressions of the genetic sequences, and that would be a prediction if mammals all inherited those genetic sequences, then
I don't
all
mind.
mammals would do those things, right?
I don't mind whether I'm not in this discussion discussing whether evolution is true or false, because it's irrelevant.
The difference is either they were given or they were inherited genetically. It's one or the other, right?
For the animal that is born tomorrow with genes that it gets from its parents, it is obviously from its phenotypes are obviously from its genes.
Mm-hmm.
Now the question is, you have a human creature that takes the genes of its parents, takes
Mm-hmm.
zero information from that about building dams or building houses or building bridges.
Because it's not present in those genetic sequences. Right.
Absolutely. And we have no proof that anything in terms of knowledge, okay, we have a sign language, we have a communication system between every living creature, including this beaver. So if this beaver has a predator, it does a specific movement and a specific action in the water that will alert every other beaver. And this is something that all beavers do. And you have the calling of birds, and you have the nests of birds, and you have the dams of the beavers, etc. Everyone has its design. And this design...
You mean everyone has its genetic inheritance?
No, everyone has the design of...
No. Everyone has its genetic inheritance, which results in a design, right?
You just didn't complete this. And everybody has its design for its housing. The design of the nest is the design of the nest. Okay, there is no proof.
You mean they have their genetic inheritance, which produces those designs?
You are claiming that this is the explanation. There is no proof for this. If you have a scientific paper that says that
I've given you the proof. You just admitted that all of their phenotypes were from their genetic sequences.
Phenotypes have never been described as producing knowledge.
They're not described as producing knowledge. They're described as producing physical traits from genetic sequences. A physical trait is like an example of a physical trait is an instinctual behavior, right? Like a heart that beats. Well, that's instinctual, right? Like building of dams. Well, that's instinctual. It's part of the phenotype.
Building of dams is not instinctual.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is in the same way. Hold on. Let me finish. Let me just finish first. Okay. Yes, it is in the same way that reacting with a start to a frightening situation, like when somebody scares you, like when you jump, in exactly the same way, those are instinctual behavior. Okay, what we're talking about is we're talking about an inbuilt trait that comes from the genetic sequences that results in a specific response to a specific set of stimuli. In the case of the beaver building the dam, it's seeing the right dam, seeing the right spot in the river, and doing and following that path of instruction following, right? In the same way, breathing, heartbeat, all of these things are physical traits that are the result of genetic sequences expressing themselves. So you wouldn't expect to find the design of the dam in the genetic sequence. Instead, what you would expect to find in the genetic sequence is something that results in some sort of physical system which causes that behavioral response in response to those situational stimuli, right? That's what you would expect to find.
Let me ask you to expand on that, because I don't think this is an explanation. You have a beaver, it's in a river, and everything is good. What will make it build a dam? It's just swimming in the river, it's happy. So why is it building a dam?
Well, it's like I'm saying.
Yeah.
When you start, when somebody, hold on, let me answer the question. Like when you start, when somebody startles you, you have a inbuilt instinctual reaction. Just like that, the beaver has an inbuilt instinctual reaction to go get wood when it sees the right spot in the river. Right?
Yeah,
it's the same thing. It's the same thing that makes your heart beat. It's the same thing that makes your lungs breathe. It's the same thing that makes you yawn when you're tired, that makes you, makes you seek food when you're hungry, makes you, do all of these instinctual behaviors that come from your genetics that are built into there. Now, we augment those with superficial knowledge, acquired knowledge. We augment those with, like, for instance, the beaver remembers where he last saw wood, right? And that's an acquired knowledge. That's not part of the genetics. Okay, he remembers where he last saw a good place in the river to do it. He remembers where he built his dam. So he augments these instinctual behaviors with acquired knowledge, but the actual instinct, the actual impulse, the compulsion, and it is a compulsion in all senses of the world. The beaver, upon seeing that part of the river, literally, chemically, cannot help himself. He has to go get wood. It's part of his DNA. Quite literally, it's built into his genetic expression, or his physical expressions, which are a result of the genetic sequences.
T, I would like to respond to that without you cutting me off, please.
Yeah, by all means.
So we have this animal. It's a beaver, and it's living in the river. It's summertime, and it really actually goes to wood and it just eats wood because that's what it eats. And there are other animals that eat wood and vegetation. Now, the question I was putting is, and I am going to comment on your answer, is how does a beaver have the concept in the first place that there is something called a civil structure called a dam? How does it understand that wood is the material that is used to build the dam? How does it understand that a log is a proper material to be used for building the dam as wood? How does it understand that to acquire such kind of wood, it needs specific dimensions of the wood? It would cut down the tree, it will cut off the branches, it will drag it, it will put boulders first, it will then put wood perpendicular to the direction of the water flow in a specific manner, in a specific organization. It will put them on top of each other. It will then bring mud. It will seal the wood so that the structure takes form. And then it will pick a place in the middle of the pond. It will build its house. It's going to construct tunnels. It's going to construct a place inside. It understands that it needs ventilation. It creates a spot for ventilation at the top of at the roof of the lodge. And then it will create its own refrigerator for the vegetation that it needs to feed. It will put it in the right place and exactly in the right time before the winter comes and snow forms. And there is this snow layer. And then it will build tunnels between the woods so that it will use it as a transportation system. Now, what I would like to put to you is that to label this as instinct and to consider that this is a series of chemical reactions or of hormonal reactions or of whatever kind of reactions is too much of a stretch. There is no evidence for it because it involves it. This is detailed, specific engineering and geographical and ecological knowledge that from our experience as the intellectual creature on this planet can be only acquired by systematic learning, which means that somebody has put it together in a book and teaches it to us. And if we do not get taught, we do not get the knowledge. And we are quite genetically and quite like mammals, and we have the best brains around. So our brains do not pick up knowledge from our genes. We share with everybody instincts, but now the same instincts too are a mystery, I have to tell you. But since I do not want to go that, okay, running fast involves, production of adrenaline that causes heartbeats to go fast, that causes this specific reaction in muscles, that causes increased metabolism, and then you would, run from your predator for survival, etc. This is something that we can trace through chemicals and through neurons and through many things. I'm looking into pure knowledge. A beaver swimming in the water at a point of time, in the right time, it goes, finds material, follows a bill of material, follows a design, creates a dam. If you kill this beaver and you take its kids in captivity, they will grow up and they will do the same thing. So this is, you have the knowledge and you have the knowledge conveyance. And now I have heard your answer. I do not want that we will just go in circles.
No, I don't. I'd like to respond.
I want to ask you another question that I would like you to take it in with you in your response. Since our day-to-day observation is that knowledge is a product of a mind and is conveyed from a mind to a mind through teaching, okay? Why do you, as a person, not as an atheist or as a biologist or as a software engineer, as a person who would like to know or to have a resolution about the existence of this supreme mind that we call God. If I am and you have the same observation of these things happening in the animal life and in the human life, and I am looking for God, you are looking for God, at least to have a resolution, to be sure that there is or there is not. Why do you not consider this a thread that you need to pursue in an involved and a serious way, to the extent that you will not just push it on the one material process that you know, which is genetics? Why don't you consider following this thread to the extent that you will find a resolution that might be out of the box? This is really a very important question to me. You can comment on everything that I said, but please give me the answer to this one.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. I didn't want to cut you off. I wanted to just let you talk. First and foremost, you asked a series of questions about how they understand these things, and my answer is very simply, they don't at all. They don't understand what a dam is. They don't understand what the right building materials are. They don't have any understanding of these things any more than you have an understanding of how to make your heart beat. Okay? That's a compulsive behavior. It's something that happens whether or not you're trying to make it happen or not, whether or not you have an understanding of how hearts beat, how your muscles contract, how your blood flows. It happens compulsively. The same way that that a baby does not understand what it means to breathe, what oxygen is, all of these things, okay? They have an instinctual behavior, a reaction which compels them to suck in air into their lungs. They get spanked and they suck in air with no understanding whatsoever. Okay, so when you ask all these questions about understanding, they have none of it any more than a baby understands how to breathe. Instead, a baby breathes instinctually. Your heart beats instinctually. You're startled when somebody you jump when somebody startles you instinctually. You have an adrenaline rush instinctually. You don't understand how to make these things occur. Well, it's the same thing with the beaver. The beaver does not understand what wood is. It doesn't understand what a dam is, doesn't understand how to build one, doesn't understand any of those things. What it does have is it has the compulsions. When it sees that part of the river, it knows it's got to go find out those long sticks, right? Got to go see where they are and snatch them down. It's compelled in the same way that you're compelled to breathe when you hold your breath. You don't have a choice in the matter. It doesn't have a choice in the matter. It doesn't think, oh, I'm going to go build a dam today, and a dam is going to be this much long and this much high, and here's the blueprint for it. That's not what happens at all. It just goes, wood. I need wood. I don't know why, but I need wood, and I'm going to go find it, right? Because that's how its biology is expressing itself through its phenotypes. Okay, so we need to wrap this up. It's 1:54, but when you say all these things, let me just finish what I'm saying. When you say all these things about understanding,
don't forget my second question.
Yeah, no, that's the second part, right? Yeah. When we say all these things about alternative hypotheses, I love alternative hypotheses. I love what they're doing in theoretical physics with UNRWA radiation, quantizing inertia, doing all of these string theory, all of these things which ultimately might lead to a better understanding by really thinking outside the box, really ditching the Newtonian assumption of things that things that are in motion tend to stay in motion. Let's just throw that in the bin and start over with a better hypothesis and a better way of approaching the problem. The problem with proposing something outside of this universe,
Mm-hmm.
you still have all the need for testing, but none of the methodology. And it's a noble pursuit to go in search of that methodology. I 100% agree that when Marie Curie saw the effects of radiation in a smoke layer and went, that's odd, I wonder, and then went on to discover radiation, which completely flew in the face of everything that we had assumed was true up until that point. I think that's a noble endeavor to go in search of the methodology, which then proved that radiation, nuclear decay, all of these things are true. That led to a revolution. That led to computers. That led to, Feynman and Dirac and Schrodinger and Einstein and all those people making all these incredible predictions and then demonstrating them correct. And so when it comes to inserting God as an explanation, the very second I see a hypothesis which has explanatory power, makes predictions about reality that is falsifiable, that is that really does, provide a good alternative, it is going to be the first thing that I pursue. It's going to be the absolute first on my list. So I'm going to wake up in the morning and I'm going to dig in. Because that's the stuff of revolutions. That's the stuff that scientific breakthroughs are made from. We just haven't seen one with God yet. In fact, we've seen all of the existing ones happen without God as part of the explanations. And so the minute that I find somebody who goes, I'd like to propose a hypothesis, and here's the predictions that the hypothesis makes, and here is the falsification of that hypothesis, and here's how it beats the null hypothesis, and the conclusion is God, I'm going to go, let's go. Let's dive in. Let's get the equipment out, right? Let's start writing some code. Let's figure out how we're going to model this and how we're going to test it and how we're going to falsify it, and let's do some science today, right? So the minute that occurs, count me in, give me a call, let me be the first, will you? Honestly, I'd love to.
Okay, so I'll just drop a couple of minutes line here, and then let's be graceful to our audience and read out some of their comments. So my comment to you is, to me, your answer was the only material process that we know that encodes for information is DNA. So let's assume that even knowledge about something is in the DNA while there is no proof. And then we say that this is not knowledge at all. The beaver does not understand anything from what it's doing. And we put this into a chain of deterministic compulsion. To me, I would have the following comment about your last sentence. When we find something that will lead us to think that there is God, you will jump onto the process and with enthusiasm. This is what I understood from you. And my question to you, if it's not this, then what? So
new hypotheses come down the pipeline all the time, and I'm always trying to be on the the frontier of scientific research. I'm always trying to be a part of the revolution, right?
So I'm giving you that a hypothesis for every single instinctive, if you would like to call it, while I disagree with the term, or knowledge-based behavior in the animal kingdom and in the human being when he is still unconscious, like when he is still a baby, unconscious to knowledge, just behaving instinctively. I am putting it to you as a hypothesis that the one who teaches the little baby to suckle is the same one who teaches the beaver to build the dam, and the same one who tells birds about migration and sparrows about building nests and ants about building their sophisticated underground structures, etc. I'm telling you that this is a hypothesis. To me, it is not a hypothesis. The only viable explanation is that there is an overarching mind that not only has created and knows what is good for each creation, but cares and guides its creators, its creation. But you wouldn't pursue it, and you would rather throw it on genetics, which is, I don't think that this, even from your perspective, has considered all the alternative explanations. Having said that, I think we have said everything. If you would like to,
I would
minutes,
just say that we should probably have another live discussion where we
Mhm.
go over the predictions of that hypothesis, because I would love to dive into it.
And I would love it, and maybe even we would bring. So I've come across a zoologist actually as an aftermath to those presentations, and maybe we bring somebody even from the zoology domain. What do you think?
That sounds fantastic. I'd love to.
All right, let's look into some comments. I'll just read the comments.
Cool.
But some of them are taking us a little bit away from what we're saying, so I'll just comment on them. So here we have first Dapper Dino, which is a guy I know. Says, I don't think that helped because instinct, therefore God, doesn't really work. Yeah, okay, so we've gone through that in full in the discussion. Best try full HD says DNA is proof of God. Well, I agree with you, but this is not really about that thing.
Yes.
Dapper Dino says suckling is common to
thermals. I'm sure he's correct, because Dapper Diner knows much more about the Linnaean taxonomy of phylogeny than I do. Being a computational biologist, I'm a little too close to the metal, as it were, whereas he sort of gets to sit back and look at the bigger picture, and he knows much more about that stuff than I do.
Actually, I have been watching some of the documentaries about beavers, and actually they're so cute suckling.
Yes, yeah.
Inside the lodge, it was like mind-blowing, but anyway. He says thurians, not all mammals.
Yeah.
I think thermals was thurians. Anyway.
Yeah, thurians, yeah.
Best try full says again, could you ask him please, how did we get male and female, and why evolution choose this difficult process? I really want to know. And then Dapper Dino comments, the evolution of sex is a bit off topic, but if you want, you can to my channel and have that discussion. Actually,
I agree. Dapper Dino is probably really well suited to answer that question.
Yeah,
so actually, I definitely suggest him.
The evolution of sex is actually one of the topics. I would also like to add this because it is one of the, I would claim, the gaps in evolutionary theory. There are some explanations, but not enough. But maybe we can have this discussion later also.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Best three full again says, inbuilt has no programmer. I think my teacher will laugh at me in the programming lesson. There is an interesting one from Rami Harfoush. He says, we do not have a choice in biological functions. We agree. But acquiring material and building stuff is not a critical life biological function. The beaver will not die if it doesn't build a dam. I agree with you, but T would tell you that there is compulsion behind it, which I don't agree with.
I would disagree with that, right? What happened was that there was some predation function which brought about that behavior, something which caused them to need to hide their young in a more protective situation, which other animals could not swim through the moat of in order to breach the castle, as opposed to leaving it in a nest out in the open and trying to defend against it. So it's not so much that the beaver will die; it's probably that their children will die, and that they won't have a good solution for protecting them and continuing the species. So that got evolutionarily selected for.
Yeah, well, the whole thing is whether it is under a selection, because it then means it needs to be encoded in a material part of the creature, which is we do not have evidence for, other than changes in behavior through hybridization, which is
that's one piece of evidence. So it's not that we don't have any evidence. That's one piece of evidence.
Actually, I have the paper about the change in burrow building, and it really suggests. It does not give an explanation to where the burrows are coming from. Let's also ask, see what best Trifo. It's a very difficult name. He says, why evolution like to amuse us with millions of species with different characteristics? like ultrasound in bats and dolphins, flying, swimming, changing images to impulses, using nerves to transmit electric information to body parts, changing sounds and electric impulses, changing CO2 to O2 and opposite. Elon Musk must give 100 million prize to the trees. Well, the trees wouldn't use the 100 million prize, but it is definitely amazing. I cannot agree less that all the diversity and it's unbelievable designs that we see around us in nature are worthy of notice. To me, they are another very obvious evidence for a creator who is a designer. But since this one is about knowledge and information, I wouldn't go there.
Well,
Yes,
it's also prediction of evolution. If there are varying environments to conquer, for life to conquer, then life would need to diversify in order to conquer each of those variants. So that would be a prediction, and one that we observe.
Yeah, well, you know my position about evolution. However, just a comment on something that you said, life would need to. Because a little while ago you said the beaver understands nothing, so why would life understand anything?
Oh,
Anyway,
I'm sorry. I was being
anything.
anthropomorphic. I'm sorry.
All right. Okay. It's a good Freudian slip, T. Okay?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Thank you, T, for this conversation.
Thank you.
I hope that some of those who would listen to this, including you, starting with you,
Yes.
would have even more curiosity to consider the alternative explanation, which is more consistent to our day-to-day observation of how knowledge is produced and transferred. Because to me, this is clear evidence that takes one to consider a mind that not only creates, but cares. And since this is why we're here, it is expected that some will accept it and some will reject it. And I hope everybody who listens to this would accept it, and that we'll meet together in paradise. And thank you, T, for being here, and thanks for the audience and for everybody who's going to watch this. And maybe we continue this later, as you suggested.
Yeah, I'd love to have further discussions. I'm always wanting to be a part of the revolution, and so thank you very much for having me on. And we'll talk again soon.
It's been pleasant talking to you. Thank you, T.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.